I'm going to tell you this one. It's about General Secretary Gorbachev. He had issued an order that everyone caught speeding should get a ticket, no matter how important they might be. One morning he was out at his country home and realized that he was running late for a meeting that he had in the Kremlin. Went out to get in his car and told the driver to get in the back seat that he'd drive. And he did. And down the street he went. And they passed two motorcycle policemen. And the one of them took off after him. And a little while later he came back and joined his companion. The fellow said, "Did you give him a ticket?" And he said, "No." Well, he said, "Why not?" Well, he said, "No, this was someone too important." Well, he said, "We were told to give it no matter who it was that they were going to take." No, he says, not that. Well, he said, "Who was it?" Well, he said, I don't know. I couldn't recognize him there. But his driver is Gorbachev.
Good morning. It is Friday, January the 20th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have What is Hip, Tucker-Carlson, No Free Lunch, Collapse of Parenting, Ben-Shapiro, Power is Not for Sissies, Hugh Hewitt, all that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Your heart, face your parents, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mercy, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam? Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, all the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets was bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the
Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Borrowing imposes a hidden burden upon taxpayers in the short run and an explicit burden in the long run, while taxes impose an explicit short-run burden and a more hidden burden in the long run. Richard K. Vedder. Choose your poison. The public seems to be more focused on what they can see and what hurts them short-term. But both borrowing and taxes impose burdens in both the short-term and the long-term. The rest is just noise around how visible and detectable and felt these burdens are.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, listening to Hugh Hewitt this morning, and he's talking about Davos and making the mistake that all the right-wing talk show hosts make, and I guess they do it because they think it's going to help their ratings, but that is giving aid and comfort to the enemy, and in this particular case to John Kerry and Al Gore. So he tells us that John Kerry was at Davos, and he's saying words to the effect that, gee, how can you go to Davos knowing Kerry's going to be there and going to bore you and that kind of thing. And said, and then Al Gore's there. Not only does he tell us Al Gore is there, but then he decides to go ahead and play a clip, and I cut it off. I didn't even listen to it. I'm not interested. I don't care what Al Gore has to say. I don't like Al Gore. I don't like his personality. Certainly don't like his character. He's a liar. He's power hungry and greedy as well. He's conceited. And he's just a bad person all the way around. And I don't want to sit and listen to bad people. Hugh Hewitt obviously thinks that when his audience tunes in, they don't want to hear from Hugh Hewitt. They want to hear from Al Gore. They want to hear from John Kerry. They want to hear from everybody on the left. Instead of hearing from maybe a conservative, instead of playing what Al Gore said at Davos, how about playing what, say, Dr. Sebastian Gorka had to say about Davos, or somebody else, a right-wing talk show host, or how about Lauren Boebert, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, I believe is her name, or any of the Republicans on the Hill. Why don't you play clips of what they have to say about Davos instead of giving Al Gore more airtime? And again, that's the mistake he makes, is that he thinks that everybody wants to listen to his show so they can hear from Al Gore. I guess he confuses it and thinks, maybe he's confused and he thinks it's the Al Gore show rather than the Hugh Hewitt show. Back in a minute. Thank you. In the news has been the debt ceiling. And so this is a perfect opportunity for the Republicans caucus on the Hill to exercise power. They simply make demands. They tell the whole country and the whole world, we're going to default on our debt unless the Democrats do X, Y, and Z. Because right now, the Democrats are the ones that are in control. They're saying, well, the Republicans are going to go ahead and default on the debt. The Republicans can make it seem as though the Democrats are defaulting on the debt, but the Republicans have to be willing to default on the debt. They have to be willing to do that. And if that sends ripples through the markets, so be it. That's the way that the left plays their games. They make you, they threaten you. They use threats and bullying tactics. Everything that they've gotten in this country has come because of bully boy tactics, not because they have convinced Americans that their way is better than the Republicans' way, but simply by bullying and intimidating their opponents into silence or into stepping aside. So this is a perfect opportunity to turn that on its head, or turn that kind of dynamic against the Democrats. They simply say, because right now the way it stands, if the rumors are correct, is the White House is not even going to negotiate on spending. They're just going to sit there and leave it in the Republicans' hands. And this is one of the things that the Republicans, I'd said this before, I don't know if the Republicans really want to win, because now that they're in power, they're expected to exercise that power and to be responsible. You know, they're going to have to account for themselves in 2 years when we have the 2024 elections. See, so now they're in charge. It's much easier to sit back and point your finger at somebody else than it is to try to fix the problems yourself. So that's the predicament that they find themselves in. But this is a power moment. And again, power is not for sissies. The power thing to do is to tell to the world, This is what we want, and unless we get it, we're going to default on the debt. And we don't care what happens to the world economy. We don't care what ripples that sends through the markets. We don't care. We're going to take control of this budget or this process once and for all. And that's the power move. But again, is it going to create a lot of problems? There are going to be gnashing of teeth and rending of garments? You bet there will be. But again, power is not for sissies. Back in a minute. A little bit of Ben-Shapiro.
White family worth is 69 times more than that of black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
So this is, the problems here for Ben-Shapiro are multitude. Number one, Ben-Shapiro's in this jam because they're laughing at him. And he's, number one is don't go look for trouble. Okay? And this is what Ben-Shapiro does on a regular basis. He runs around the country looking for trouble. You want to be a true conservative, you don't look for trouble. You mind your own business. Number two is that you never concede the point. This person came up, some voice off the, this is a video, and so you could see him and a couple of other panel members, but you didn't see who was asking the question. But they say, they make this arbitrary and capricious claim that white families are 69 times richer than the average black family, or words to that effect. The answer to that is bullshit. You're a liar. If black families are so poor, tell that to Barack Obama. Tell that to LeBron James. Tell that to Oprah Winfrey. Tell that to the guy that owns Black Entertainment Television. Tell that to all the black millionaires in this country. Okay? You deny it. You absolutely 100% deny it because you got to make them prove it. It's not my burden of proof. The burden of proof is not on me. It's on you. If you're going to make the case that there's still racism in this country, the burden of proof is on you. Prove it. And if this is your way of doing it, again, prove it, prove it, prove it. That's what the true conservative does. You throw the bullshit flag and just say deny it outright, or you can start asking questions. Where'd you get these statistics? But I like throwing the bullshit flag better. But anyways, those are the two big problems here for Ben-Shapiro. Number one, don't go looking for trouble. Don't run around looking for panels to be on in which you're going to be asked hostile questions. Don't do that. You make yourself, and not only yourself, but every potential conservative in this country, you make them look like a jerk. Don't do that. And number two, when you do find yourself in a position where you're getting this kind of hostile questioning, don't concede the point. Once you concede the point, you're screwed. Okay, you cannot prove a negative. And this is the way they always start. They make an arbitrary claim and then demand that you prove that their arbitrary claim is false or not so. Prove the negative. It can't be done. It's impossible to prove a negative, so you turn the tables on them, make them prove a positive. So you say bullshit. Now, you might be afraid, well, what if he comes up with a statistic? Or, well, what is he going to come up with, a piece of paper? So you say, what is this supposed to be? What is this? Okay? Make him prove it all the way. You don't take his word for it for anything. Again, that's the way they operate. They give you an arbitrary claim, and then they demand you, in which they're demanding you take their word for it, and then demand that you prove a negative, prove that there's not racism in this country. Can't be done. And you don't have to. Nobody has to explain the status quo. It's the people that want change that have the burden of proof. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now I'm going to be playing an audible version of the book that I read for the podcast called The Collapse of Parenting, How We Hurt Our Children by Treating Them Like Adults by Dr.-sax. And this is chapter 1, and it's about 15 minutes.
This is Audible.
Blackstone Audio presents The Collapse of Parenting, How We Hurt Our Kids When We Treat Them Like Grown-Ups by Leonard Sachs, M.D., Ph.D. This book is read by Malcolm Hilgartner. Dedicated to my wife, Katie, and my daughter, Sarah. Part 1. Problems. Introduction. Parents Adrift. I knew what I wanted to say, but I didn't say it. Al and Mary McMaster have 2 daughters, Tara and Margot. All names have been changed, except where noted. Mom brought 14-year-old Tara in to see me. Mom was concerned about an irritated rash at both corners of Tara's mouth. I've tried some over-the-counter creams, but nothing has worked, Mom said. What do you think it is? After examining the rash, I answered, this rash sometimes can be a sign of a vitamin deficiency. I see this rash frequently in people who aren't eating cruciferous vegetables, such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and cauliflower, or green leafy vegetables such as spinach and kale. How good is Tara at eating those vegetables? Tara snorted. Mom sighed. Her father and I eat very healthy, Mom said. But Tara refuses to eat most vegetables. To be honest, right now pretty much the only things she will eat are French fries. McDonald's French fries, Tara interrupted. McDonald's French fries, pizza, chicken nuggets, and potato chips, Mom finished. That's pretty much it right now, except for frozen desserts like Italian ices and ice cream. How about broccoli or cauliflower or spinach? I asked. She just won't eat those things, Mary said. She would if she were hungry enough, I thought to myself, but I didn't say it. Jim and Tammy Bardas have 1 child, Kimberly, 8 years old. After carefully researching the local public schools, Jim and Tammy were concerned about what they considered an overemphasis on basic skills, such as reading and writing, and the elimination of what the public schools now call enrichment programs, art and music in particular. Those programs had been cut because of shortfalls in the district's budget, so Jim and Tammy decided to enroll Kimberly in a private school, even though it wouldn't be easy for them financially. Tammy took Kimberly to visit 4 different schools. Tammy and Jim both liked School X. The atmosphere was warm and nurturing, the teachers were enthusiastic, and the long-term outcomes of the students were well documented. But Kimberly liked School Y. On her visit to School Y, Kimberly had clicked with the student escort, a 9-year-old named Madison. Madison and Kimberly discovered that they both liked the Ramona and Beezus books by Beverly Cleary, and they both liked American Girl dolls. But the parents were concerned about the dilapidated condition of the school, the lack of enthusiasm on the part of the teachers and administrators, and the school's refusal to disclose where graduates of the school, a K-8 school, went to high school. Tammy and Jim advised their daughter to attend School X, but Kimberly insisted on School Y, and that's the school where she is now enrolled. When I asked Tammy why she and her husband allowed their 8-year-old daughter to have the final say, Tammy answered, I think good parenting means letting kids decide. That's how kids learn, right? If I make all the decisions for her, how will she ever learn to decide on her own? And if I force her to go to a school that wasn't her first choice, what can I say if she complains about the school later? 40 years ago, most parents who sent their kids to private schools didn't ask their child which school the child preferred. 40 years ago, the parents made that decision, often overruling their child's preference. Even 30 years ago, when I graduated from medical school, it would have been unusual for parents to let an 8-year-old have the final say in the choice of school. Today, it is common. I'm not suggesting that the 1970s or the 1980s were better than our own era. Every era has its shortcomings. But I don't think we are facing up to ours. My friend Janet Phillips and her late husband Bill Phillips, their true names, raised 4 sons. When the boys were in high school, Janet and Bill became concerned about stories they were hearing about kids drinking. Then they saw it for themselves. High school kids who were clearly drunk, but who were nevertheless getting behind the wheel of a car. What to do? Bill bought a breathalyzer. The next time there was a party at their house, Bill saw a boy who appeared to be drunk. Bill told the boy, "Come with me." He handed the boy the breathalyzer and told him to blow into the device. Sure enough, the boy was drunk. Janet called the boy's parents and asked them to take their intoxicated son home. To the surprise of both Bill and Janet, the boy's parents were offended by the phone call. The boy's mother did take her son home, without a word of thanks to either Janet or Bill. Other parents did not receive Janet and Bill's breathalyzer strategy enthusiastically either. One parent, Ms. Stoltz, gave Janet a piece of her mind. "Kids these days are going to drink whether you like it or not," Ms. Stoltz said. "I think our job is to teach them to drink responsibly." "At 15 years of age?" Janet asked. "At whatever age. I'd rather have them drink in my own home than hide their drinking from me." Several days later, Janet happened to be standing just a few feet away when Miss Stoltz picked up her youngest son, about 12 years old, from school. The boy climbed into the back seat of the car. Miss Stoltz turned around and asked him, "How was your day?" Her son said to her, "Turn around, shut up, drive." Miss Stoltz glanced at Janet and drove away without saying a word. As near as Janet can recall, she and her husband actually used the breathalyzer only twice. But they always kept it in full view, where every kid could see it whenever any of their teenage sons had a party. Their home became known as the home where those crazy parents will use a breathalyzer on you. And that had consequences. Some of the consequences were predictable, and some perhaps were not. The 4 sons were popular, so their house was a favorite hangout early in the evening. Then, around 9:30 p.m., a certain contingent would leave to go to other parties where alcohol would be freely available. But other kids would stay. And sometimes, still other kids would arrive. That's what was unexpected. Not all teenage kids like to get drunk. Some do not. But in contemporary American culture, it's hard for a teen to just say no without looking uncool. An excuse is helpful. A girl or boy could say when offered a drink, "Hey, I'd love to, but I'm on my way to the Phillips house and you know their crazy dad. He's the one with the breathalyzer." And that provides a respectable excuse not to drink. Here's what's weird. We parents are spending more and more time and money on parenting. But when you look at the results, things are getting worse, not better. American kids are now much more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD or bipolar disorder or other psychiatric disorders than they were 25 years ago. I will present that evidence in Chapter 3. And they are heavier and less fit than they were 25 years ago. Chapter 2. Long-term outcome studies suggest that American kids are now less resilient and more fragile than they used to be. In Chapter 5, I will explain what I mean by more fragile, and I will present the evidence supporting that claim as well. What's going on? Here's my diagnosis. Over the past 3 decades, there has been a massive transfer of authority from parents to kids. Along with that transfer of authority has come a change in the valuation of kids' opinions and preferences. In many families, what kids think and what kids like and what kids want now matters as much or more than what their parents think and like and want. Let kids decide has become a mantra of good parenting. As I will show, these well-intentioned changes have been profoundly harmful to kids. The first half of this book poses the problems. The second half provides the solutions. I think I have figured out where we have gone wrong and how to fix it. My prescription is based primarily on what I have seen in the office over the past quarter century, but also draws on what I have learned from my conversations with parents, teachers, and kids, both within and outside the United States. You may be wondering, who is this Leonard Sachs guy and what makes him the expert? It's a fair question. I am a family physician, board certified in family medicine, currently in practice in Chester County, Pennsylvania. I also have a PhD in psychology. I grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, where I attended public schools from kindergarten through grade 12. I earned my undergraduate degree in biology at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I earned both my MD and my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. After doing a 3-year residency in family medicine, I practiced for 19 years in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C. I then relocated to Pennsylvania. My primary sources for this book are the more than 90,000 office visits I have conducted in my role as a practicing physician between 1989 and today. I have seen children, teenagers, and their parents from a wide variety of backgrounds and circumstances. I have seen, from the intimate yet objective perspective of the family physician, the profound changes in American life over the past quarter century. I have witnessed firsthand the collapse of parenting. In 2001, I began visiting schools and communities, first across the United States and then in Australia, Canada, England, Germany, Italy, Mexico, New Zealand, Scotland, Spain, and Switzerland, meeting with teachers and parents, talking with children and teenagers, and comparing notes with professors. I published 3 books for parents, sharing what I was learning. Why Gender Matters, 2005, Boys Adrift, 2007, and Girls on the Edge, 2010. The success of those books led to more invitations to visit schools and communities. From July 2008 through June 2013, I took an extended leave from medical practice in order to devote myself full-time to these visits. I have now visited more than 380 venues across North America and around the world, meeting with students, teachers, and/or parents face-to-face. In my earlier books, I focused on gender issues, which I still think are important. What a girl needs in order to become a successful and fulfilled woman may sometimes differ from what a boy needs in order to become a successful and fulfilled man. But the issues I explore in this book transcend gender differences. In this book, I will share with you what I have learned about the collapse of parenting over the past 30 years. Like any competent physician, I will first review the evidence. Then I will explain my diagnosis, and I will prescribe a treatment. The treatment will be 3 things in fact, that you can do starting today in your home without spending any money that will improve the odds of a good outcome for your child. And I will share success stories. We will hear more about Janet Phillips and her 4 sons and other families like hers, families who have achieved good outcomes despite the odds. These stories, supplemented by recent scholarly research, will provide the basis for the 3 things you must do if you're going to raise a healthy child in the modern world. Healthy not only physically, but also emotionally and of good character, honest and conscientious. It's still possible to raise a healthy child. It is not easy, but it can be done. Some aspects of the collapse of parenting are just as problematic in England and Australia as they are in the United States. In every country I have visited, I have found parents who are unsure about their role. They ask, should I be my child's most trusted confidant, my child's best friend? But if I am my son's best friend, how can I tell him that he is not allowed to play violent video games? Dr. Timothy Wright is headmaster of Shore, a private school I visited in Sydney, Australia. He recently told me how a parent asked him to counsel her son about the appropriate use of video games, which games are okay to play, which games are not, and how much time he should spend playing. Gently but firmly, Dr. Wright refused. He explained that the job of guiding and governing a boy's use of video games is the job of the parent, not the job of a school administrator. So some aspects of this problem are found worldwide. But other aspects of the collapse of parenting are peculiar to North America and especially to the United States.
Chief among these is the culture of disrespect.
Thank you, Dr. Sax. So this is the end of Chapter 1 of the book, The Collapse of Parenting, How We Hurt Our Children When We Treat Them Like Adults. So I think that this book would have been better off, number one, if he had gone ahead and made it more pointed as a how-to book for the average parent. Second thing that he doesn't play up enough is in terms of when people ask, well, what kind of an expert are you? And so he goes through all his credentials and he goes through his travels and whatnot. The simplest, most direct answer to that question is, I'm a parent. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of Tucker-Carlson on the deep state.
So what's notable as a political matter is that every one of these disasters, the fentanyl epidemic, the chaos and crime in our cities, the invasion underway through Texas, Arizona, and California, all of those deeply concern Americans. We're not guessing at that. Polls show it very clearly. By contrast, how many voters do you think are lying awake right now worrying that public officials might violate some obscure federal classification law? None. Not a single person. No one outside Washington cares or even understands the issue. And yet, it is classified documents, not our open borders, that the Justice Department is punishing Joe Biden for. Why is that? What's going on here? Well, it's simple. Washington is protecting itself. Joe Biden alone is responsible for this crime. He alone took home classified documents. He didn't have help in doing that. But allowing the country to be invaded, that's not something you can do by yourself. So if Biden were to be taken down for opening the southern border, a lot of other people would go with him. He had a lot of accomplices. Permanent Washington doesn't want that. And ultimately, and here's the point, permanent Washington is in charge. It's not the democracy you imagine. We're seeing that now. So if you want to understand, if you really want to understand how the American government actually works at the highest levels, and if you want to know why they don't teach history anymore, one thing you should know is that the most popular president in American history was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon. Yet somehow, without a single vote being cast by a single American voter, Richard Nixon was kicked out of office and replaced by the only unelected president in American history. So we went from the most popular president to a president nobody voted for. Wait a minute, you may ask. Why didn't I know that? Wasn't Richard Nixon a criminal? Wasn't he despised by all decent people? No, he wasn't. In fact, if any president could claim to be the people's choice, it was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was reelected in 1972 by the largest margin of the popular vote ever recorded before or since. Nixon got 17 million more votes than his opponent. Less than 2 years later, he was gone. He was forced to resign. And in his place, an obedient servant of the federal agencies called Gerald Ford took over the White House. How did that happen? Well, it's a long story, but here are the highlights, and they tell you a lot. Richard Nixon believed that elements in the federal bureaucracy were working to undermine the American system of government, and had been doing that for a long time. He often said that. He was absolutely right. On June 23, 1972, Nixon met with the then CIA Director Richard Helms at the White House. During the conversation, which thankfully was tape recorded, Nixon suggested he knew, quote, who shot John, meaning President John F. Kennedy. Nixon further implied that the CIA was directly involved in Kennedy's assassination, which we now know it was. Helms' telling response? Total silence. But for Nixon, it didn't matter because it was already over. 4 days before, on June 19th, the Washington Post had published the first of many stories about a break-in at the Watergate office building. Unbeknownst to Nixon and unreported by the Washington Post, 4 of the 5 burglars worked for the CIA. The first of many dishonest Watergate stories was written by a 29-year-old Metro reporter called Bob Woodward. Who exactly was Bob Woodward? Well, he wasn't a journalist. Bob Woodward had no background whatsoever in the news business. Instead, Bob Woodward came directly from the classified areas of the federal government. Shortly before Watergate, Woodward was a naval officer at the Pentagon. He had a top-secret clearance. He worked regularly with the intel agencies. At times, Woodward was even detailed to the Nixon White House, where he interacted with Richard Nixon's top aides. Soon after leaving the Navy, for reasons that have never been clear, Woodward was hired by the most powerful news outlet in Washington and assigned the biggest story in the country. And just to make it crystal clear what was actually happening, Woodward's main source for his Watergate series was the deputy director of the FBI, Mark Felt. And Mark Felt ran, and we're not making this up, the FBI's COINTELPRO program, which was designed to secretly discredit political actors the federal agencies wanted to destroy, people like Richard Nixon. And at the same time, those same agencies were also working to take down Nixon's elected vice president, Spiro Agnew. In the fall of 1973, Agnew was indicted for tax evasion and forced to resign. His replacement was a colorless congressman from Grand Rapids called Gerald Ford. What was Ford's qualification for the job? Well, he had served on the Warren Commission, which absolved the CIA of responsibility for President Kennedy's murder. Nixon was strong-armed into accepting Gerald Ford by Democrats in Congress. Quote, "We gave Nixon no choice but Ford," Speaker of the House Carl Albert later boasted. 8 months later, Gerald Ford of the Warren Commission was the President of the United States. See how that works? So those are the facts, not speculation. All of that actually happened. None of it's secret. Most of it actually is on Wikipedia. But no mainstream news organization has ever told that story. It's so obvious, yet it's intentionally ignored. And as a result, permanent Washington remains in charge of our political system. Unelected lifers in the federal agencies make the biggest decisions in American government and crush anyone who tries to rein them in.
And so that was Tucker-Carlson about the deep state, basically is what it ends up being about. Started out with Biden. And I don't know, it seems sometimes he gets a little bit on the conspiratorial side. Again, all of that is take my word for it. And so my conscience, the alarm is going off here. None of this is about common sense. I like some of it. I like the idea of having Richard Nixon being more of a victim than a villain, because I'm a Republican-leaning independent. So I like that idea. The Nixon resignation was a huge black eye for the Republican Party. But and I also always felt that Woodward and Bernstein were overrated. And anyways, he's like I said, it's very, very has this very conspiratorial tones to it. And again, the things with Nixon was like 50 years ago, so or 45 years ago thereabouts. But why hasn't any of this come out up until now? Everything has been kept secret and under wraps. And it's been going on for forever, this idea that somebody else other than Lee Harvey Oswald shot or killed President Kennedy. And so he's going to have to do better than that to convince me. I know who killed John and all that stuff, all really vague. And no, I'm just, although I'd like to believe it, again, I like some of the directions that it's going in. It's not enough to convince me of anything that he has said. I'm not even convinced there's such thing as a deep state. I keep hearing about that, and I've heard it from former President Donald Trump. There is such thing as federal employee unions that may have vested interests in maintaining certain status quos. Or in shaping government policy. But again, that's a lot different than a mysterious deep state. You can simply, we can decertify those unions, make those workers go back to being civil servants, or as they used to be, they can be, all the jobs in Washington can be patronage jobs. That means as soon as the president leaves, all of those people go with him. And that's the solution really to that problem. That's the solution to all having, if you're really, really concerned about that there's this permanent class of people that are having them making their careers, that are bureaucrats, nameless, faceless, unelected bureaucrats that are really shaping policy and running the government, so to speak, then that's the best way to get rid of them. And it seems to me that in any case, that the essence and the nut here is, as long as we keep the secret ballot, as long as Americans are able to vote and do so in secret, we still hold the power. We can change people and keep changing them until they are able to pass laws or affect the kinds of changes that we want to see. So, but again, that was Tucker-Carlson with what's happening with Joe Biden, what he believes is happening with Joe Biden, which is that the deep state is trying to force him out because of what's going on at the border. And back in a minute.
So you wanted to pump on the street there, knees up to a hip there, but you ain't justice, have to show what's hip. So you stop to let your hair grow, wear a big spot on your white robe, but somehow you know there's much more to the drink. What is it? Tell me, did you know? What is it? And do you really live? How do you do your show? You will live in a drink.
Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. Until next time, remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.